since we are doing this interview for Future Challenges and
Sure.
We Magazine also, how has your understanding of we changed since the rise of the internet?
Well, you know,
Has it changed?
I think it has changed because, and one illustration is, you know, I actually grew up in, and I'll chat about this during the presentation tomorrow, but I actually grew up in an area that was, you know, not very technologically based. It was actually quite limited, and, you know, technology was frowned upon, advancement, progress was frowned upon. And yet, you know, there was a heavy community clustering. There was a real sense of you received your worldview from listening to parents interact, or you know, his religious sense as well, listening to people in the community interact, the religious framework that you're being guided by. And this structure, this tight-knit sense of community has, I think, for many people been largely fragmented since the rise of media. Media has a way of fragmenting humanity. At least it's in its initial iteration, it did through you know, radio and television, and then as the internet started, suddenly we were able to exist in small subsets in society, where we wouldn't know the people that we interact with at work, and yet we would be fairly well related to people who we've maybe only met online through text or through bulletin board systems or you know, blogs or whatever else. And more recently, chat roulette is a great example of this sort of voyeuristic, but the sense in which we can form connections around the world.
Right.
And so I think what we have become has been formed and transformed by social media. So in a very ironic sense, that, you know, the initial fragmentation of media, that, you know, what McLuhan looks at as sort of the electrification, but how we split up our various identities across different platforms, different systems. We acquire our worldview not through a newspaper only, or even not through a newspaper or a TV program. We form our worldview through this, really through weaving networks, forming a narrative of coherence by interacting with others in these social spaces. And so in a somewhat surprising way, social media, as a very loose term, has resulted in a sense sort of a binding back. You know, we're binding back to this small clustered humanity that, as I mentioned, I grew up with in a very closed community. But in this case, it's occurring in a more of an open space, and so we have the sense where now we can be very well connected to small groups of individuals who guide us, inform us, and provide a sense of direction. And I think in a lot of ways that sense of we is contributing to how we form our understanding of the world. These agents, these individuals that we know, likely global networks, are assisting us in forming our understanding. And they're doing it primarily through social means, through filtering information, through amplifying information, through introducing each other to their own contacts. So in that sense, I think we, as a concept, has moved from the communal whole that we perhaps had before technology to a fragmentation that technology created, to now, with the rise of social technologies, to a binding back to some of those smaller clustered social groups.
Do you see any connection between this understanding of we and the fact that we are saying education is one of our biggest future challenges we are facing?
I think so. You know, and this is one of the difficulties that I believe educators face, and not just teachers and instructors or professors, but really leaders, parents, you know, school leaders, the funding challenges that arise around an education system. There's a sense in which education serves several roles. I mean, on the one hand, it serves the advancement and the development of individual minds, you know, what Edgar Morin calls, you know, the vital combat for lucidity. But there's a secondary sense as well in which it serves to elevate the capacity of a society to meet its own challenges. And so if an education system isn't matched, so to speak, to the needs of a society or the needs of a particular era, it faces irrelevance on many levels. And so when we have, let's say, tightly structured classrooms that aren't as permeable as let's say, needs to be for innovation, because innovation occurs in climates of diversity, in climates where you have a lot of elements bumping randomly into each other, forming novel connections, novel experiences that come from those connections. The education system we have today is based on a duplication model in many cases. In some sense, it might be changing.
Duplicating what?
Duplicating what's known. Right? You know, where someone has decided this is a body of knowledge and this is what you must learn. I mean, textbooks are a great example. Someone said this is a textbook, regardless of the experience and the attributes of the individual learner. individuals are put into sort of mastering this textbook. But the reality is, even if we can put a body of knowledge into some kind of a structure like a textbook, each learner that approaches that textbook comes out with a dramatically different set of life experiences. So I think to not have an adaptive approach is essentially a model of rendering your system obsolete, because as the world around you changes, and yet your education system is based on the generation of certain sense of normality, which it really is. Education normalizes people in many instances to a certain standard. That's why we have standardized testing and things like that. So if we put those concerns aside and we start to say, how is it that we can adopt a mindset in education that's directly related to the needs of society? How can we create a permeable, loosely coupled system that is capable of interacting and changing to the needs of society and to the varying skill and experience levels of the learners? Then I think you have a system that better meets the future challenges.